Yeah, so today's presentation is really around the idea of people analytics. So we're in the corporate space here, and we chose this particular topic because there's so much talk about big data and artificial intelligence and machine learning. But the reality is when it comes to people analytics and people capability, it's very, very difficult for organizations to have big data about their people. There just isn't the transactional numbers available. And so what I wanted to chat through today was the idea of how HR, and particularly in terms of the function of people analytics, can use small data to extract insight and really have meaningful conversations with line managers. And this is really a way to kind of jumpstart your people analytics capability within a corporate environment. So if we have a look at what we're trying to do with people analytics, there's a phrase that says we now live in a data economy. So in other words, whoever owns the data tends to be the wealthiest and the richest and have the most toys. So if we're living in a data economy, then data is really the currency. And just like if you were in any real economy, if that currency is counterfeit and the market is flooded with currency that is not legal tender, then that economy is not going to be able to function properly. In the same way that if we're living in a data economy, data quality really matters. And when we're talking about data quality, we're talking about making sure that the data we have is accurate, complete, and up to date. Now, from a people point of view, that can be tricky. And often what we find with our clients is that LinkedIn knows more about the people that work there than they do. It's very, very difficult to keep people information up to date because there's very seldom an incentive for employees in companies to update their information. So with this analogy of living in a data economy, if we understand that data is currency, there is a distinct difference between currency and wealth. If I gave two people $100,000 and came back 5 years later, it would be interesting to see which of them had turned the $100,000 into more, say $200,000, and which of them had $50,000 left. So the idea behind living in an economy and using this analogy around a data economy, if data is currency, then creating wealth is a process. So it's how you use that data that creates insight and wealth. And this is the kind of data pyramid that most people may be familiar with, but I just want to run through it. Obviously, at the bottom of that pyramid is the data itself. And so that forms the foundation of everything. Is that data good quality data? But once we have the data, we have to move to the next level, which is information, which is really about saying, well, yeah, but what does this data actually mean? So we have the data points, but if we can't attach meaning to it, if we don't know why this data is important, then we don't have information. Once we have the information, though, in order to have knowledge, we've got to be able to answer the question, yes, but why is this information now useful to us? And that usually requires the connection and the assimilation of information so that we can say we've got one bit of data, second bit of data, third bit of data. When we put those together, we start to see how that data interacts. And now we can start to see how that data is becoming useful. But if we want to move from just how this is useful and really create a level of wisdom within that company, then we've got to be able to say, okay, now we know how it's useful, but then how do we actually apply this knowledge to make our company better? And I'm going to talk specifically about the area of talent management and people analytics, and specifically even in talent within people analytics, the talent part of it. So we're not looking at compensation data and overtime and leave and things like that. There's a lot of interesting data there, but that's not the part we're going to have a look at today. So the idea is, through this presentation, I want to have a discussion around how we then move from data to information to knowledge to wisdom. We have a look at how important people data and people analytics is. There's some research that's been done, and although this is slightly older research, the point of it was to just illustrate that people analytics has really risen from the the bottom of the importance pile and is now sitting, well, was in 2018, sitting second from the top. It'll be interesting to see where it is in 2019 or 2020 coming up. But as I say, the concept of living in a data economy obviously means that data becomes more important. So it's just logical that people who can work with that data and the process of working with data rises in terms of importance. Now, if we're going to extend this analogy of working in a data economy, then we need to understand there's the wealthy and there's the poor when it comes to a data economy. Now, being data poor really means that, and this is just an example, if you have a set of executives sitting around a table, very often a CFO and finance, marketing, operations, those functions are built on data as a foundation. The CFO always knows how much money was made. You never ask a CFO of a company, how much money did we make last year? And they go, well, we made a lot of money, or we didn't make that much money. They're very specific. They can give you the revenue, they can give you EBITDA, they can tell you what the gearing was. There would be a whole range of data that they could provide to you. And that is why their level of participation, their impact, and their value is appreciated. Now, if you consider from a CHRO perspective, when those questions get asked, perhaps we get a little too complacent with, and this is just a succession example, when will the new CEO be ready? Well, succession is always ready now, ready later, ready much later. That is not a particularly useful bit of data. It doesn't really tell me anything, and as most of us in corporate would know, ready now doesn't mean ready now. Ready now means sometime in the future. And so if a position becomes vacant, it's very seldom that ready now successors actually get the opportunity to move into those positions. So being data poor reduces participation, reduces impact, and ultimately destroys value. So what we want to try and do is we want to try and create, particularly in the HR space, we want to create an opportunity for HR to be data rich. And if we can create an opportunity for HR to be data rich, then we can start to increase the participation of HR at the table. We can increase the impact that HR can have, because suddenly human resources is guiding the allocation of resources into the development of talent. And the last one is obviously that if you're starting to have an impact and you're participating, then there's the perception that you're adding value. So let's see how this can be done. Now, one of the tricky parts around people analytics is that HR is not usually in the people analytics numeric space. So there's really three key competencies or capabilities required to operate in the analytics space. One is understanding data. So you need to be data literate. The second is being technology literate. Understand how to use the technology that manages the data. And the third, and this is a tricky one, is being visually literate. Understanding hierarchies, understanding how to display information and visualize it. So from that perspective, perhaps from an HR point of view, it becomes tricky when HR going, those are not my three strengths. I understand HR processes, I understand people, I understand my business, but those three things are not my strengths. So what we wanted to try and explain is that people analytics is essentially on a continuum. Yes, on the one side, on the right-hand side there, you have your data scientists, you have your machine learning, you have your predictive algorithms, you have your models that get built. And that side of the analytics continuum is definitely a place for specialized skill sets. But on the left-hand side of this continuum is we can also start to use what we have. We can rather think about how we facilitate the conversation with the data that we have, and then create actionable insights from that data, rather than put together customized research, build statistical models, and present papers. So how do these two sides of the continuum differ from one another? And I'm going to propose that most of HR should really be sitting on the left-hand side of this, and occasionally we can access some of the very specialized skills on the right-hand side. So if we have a look at the difference in terms of the data analytics continuum, the first thing that we could have a look at is how does the data source differ? Well, generally on the left-hand side, we try to use easily accessible data, whereas on the right-hand side, it can be very challenging to collect that data. So if we wanted to try and understand let's say, for example, which people happen to be more successful in a particular role. One of the things we'd have to do is we'd have to start building some information or information hierarchy to try and understand, well, what are the variables that have an impact? We'd need a larger sample size. We'd need to do multiple studies. We'd need to do some correlation studies. We'd need to start understanding those variables, building models. Now, that might be possible if you're talking about a position like a call center operator, or call center supervisor. But if you're saying, I'm looking for an international marketing manager who can operate in Europe, how many of those do you have? Maybe 2 or 3. So your sample size is just not big enough to actually collect enough information to find out what makes a great marketing manager in Europe. So we're going to work with easily accessible data. The second thing that we work with is we want to work with relatively simple concepts, whereas on the other side, we can work with very complex concepts around machine learning and artificial intelligence, which in my mind is still a fair way off when it comes to people analytics. The primary skill set for the left-hand side is HR knowledge, how HR works, what the value chain is, all the way through from attraction, recruitment, development, performance management, all the way through to exiting people. On the right-hand side, your core competence is more statistical research. The area of focus on the left-hand side tends to be broader, whereas research generally tends to have to be very narrow. The presentation of the information tends to be more visual on this side, whereas it tends to be more mathematical on the statistical side. From the validity point of view, what we're interested in is trying to understand and build consensus-driven insights, whereas on the right-hand side, we need to build valid statistical models that have a high significance and correlation coefficient. So the purpose of using analytics on the left-hand side of this continuum is to promote discussion and to take action. It's a far more practical sense of, we have some data, so what does this data mean? Now that we understand what it means, now what do we do about it? Whereas on the right-hand side, we're trying to build a model and predict the future. So if we have a look at HR and say, how do we jumpstart people analytics as a capability within a company? We really want to focus on the left-hand side of this particular continuum and leave the right-hand side to very specialized options. So what I'd like to do then is give you an example of how we can take this information, very basic information, and turn that into something hopefully that is going to be interesting to chat about. So I'm going to start with this data set. Now, generally, the information over here, employee number, employee division, functional unit, job grade, date of birth, start date, gender, manager, is all within an HRIS system. It's almost the absolute minimum requirement in terms of having an HRIS system would be to have that data set. So all of this is very easily accessible, very standardized information. I'm adding 4 additional data points on the right-hand side. And these are usually the result of talent processes that take place within organizations. The first is performance. Most organizations have some type of performance system, the accuracy of which is debatable, but at the end of the day, usually there's, even if asking the manager, how does this person perform, there's some ability to differentiate people who are contributing and people who aren't. Potential, that's a much trickier factor to assess and often is misassessed or misidentified. Engagement is the level of interaction, the discretionary effort, if you will, that the person's prepared to commit to the organization. Also a relatively easy thing to identify if you ask the manager. Almost impossible to identify if you use an engagement survey, because engagement surveys tend to be broad, anonymous, and aggregate data. So I don't understand how engaged an individual is, but I do understand a department or a function or a country. And then the last one is impact of loss. Again, impact of loss, high, medium, and low. How much it's going to cost to replace the person if they leave. Now, one of the challenges with data is that information, if I look at it, really, I would struggle to make sense of that information. It isn't telling me anything. So what we want to do is I just want to illustrate how if we take just 2 of those data points here and we put them into a matrix, how we can start immediately to start extracting some value from the information that would normally just be sitting in a spreadsheet and pretty much inaccessible in terms of what this means. So here is a matrix. On this side, we're looking at, I'm using tenure. So how long the person's been with the company, which is fairly simple to calculate as a result of their start date with the company. And on this side, I'm using age. But actually what I'm doing is I'm looking at retirement risk. So although I have date of birth and I have start date, those two data points on their own don't mean much. But what tenure does mean is how much institutional knowledge this person has. How well they know the business, how well they know other people in the business, how well they know our products and our customers, and our policies and procedures. So somebody who's been with the business a longer period of time has more institutional knowledge. So if you own a business or you work in a business, imagine if everyone in that business left tomorrow and you replaced every single person. Essentially, that organization would suffer from amnesia. It would completely have forgotten everything about itself. So institutional knowledge resides in individuals, and it's really important to know who those people are. Now, the size of the dot indicates the number of people. So in this case, I've got more people who are 36 who have been with us 8 to 9 years than I do people who are 52 who have been with us 8 to 9 years. The reason I've now color-coded these is these people have institutional knowledge. These people have joined more recently, so they need to acquire institutional knowledge. These people up here have a lot of institutional knowledge, but are more than likely going to be required to leave from a legislative point of view from a retirement age. So my question is, what am I doing to replace and ensure continuity of the knowledge and skills that this group of people have? And then here I've got somebody who's come in fairly late in their career, which is probably indicative of the fact that I didn't do any succession planning. The other thing about taking these two data points and looking at it in this way is it almost looks like we've taken a geological slice of the history of this organization. And immediately what I can see is that around 8 to 9 years ago, we seem to have a bit of a growth spurt. We hired quite a lot of people, and then we tapered off. So we hired quite significantly less, and we're not hiring that many people at the moment. So it's almost an indication of the rate of growth of our organization. So this indicates a lot of growth, and then we stopped growing. So I've just taken two data points, but we visualized them like this. So this gives us the, so what do we do with this information? Now, I want to have a look at the, now I want to have a look at what this means in terms of what we're going to do with this information. All right, Siobhan reminded me I have 5 minutes. I am aware of that. Okay, so if we have a look at the information, what we want to do is we also want to be able to say, I'm speaking to a line manager, tell me, you've not told me that we have this many people, 8 people who have only been here less than 2 years. What do you want me to do with that? So these people need to rapidly build institutional knowledge to be effective. So what I want you to do is find opportunities for them to interact broadly across the company, build their personal network, and have frequent contact with senior leaders. And we do the same thing for each of these groups. So each group, basically, we're able to understand not just who those people are, but what it is that we should do to try and leverage this information and make better sense of it. So let me just show you then quickly what this looks like from an interactive point of view, because the key to analytics is conversation. It's not just about producing the pretty pictures, it is about having the conversation. So if I was sitting with a group of line managers in a business and I had this information available to me, I'd say, first of all, we're going to go through the sales and distribution function. So that's pretty much where our growth spurt was in sales and distribution. What I want to try and understand is, who are those 8 people? Okay, I can see who they are. Have we onboarded them correctly? The next thing we want to have a look at is, who's leaving our sales and distribution organization? Have we made a plan to replace that person? Have they transferred skills and knowledge? What happens to the relationships that they have? Then if I add one more bit of information here, I can actually have a look at this right across the whole business, or within business risk management. And now I can see that that same pattern of growth didn't take place in business management. So we grew in sales, but not business risk management. And if I wanted to have a look at one more data point, which is impact of loss, who do we need to focus on? If we lose any of these people, we may be in trouble because it's going to be very expensive to replace them. So that's kind of how we would take this information and use it going forward. So hopefully the point of the presentation here is to say small data can be super interesting as well. But really, what it's got to do is it's got to be compelling. You've got to help people to make these type of connections. Going from the spreadsheet that we had into kind of visualization that I've just shown you makes a more engaging conversation. What I wanted to share then with you, Shivam, is that at learn.peopletreeanalytics.com, people could go and create a free account and go and take a look around some of the models and analytics that we've built, where we've just looked at one. We looked at the talent risk analytics, but there's a whole bunch of things around people analytics that is quite exciting to discuss. And anybody can log in, take a look at those courses. There's short little introductory videos around each of them.